So to conclude this series, we've moved from suggestion to now pure speculation, which doesn't mean, which means that there really is no basis for this other than personal interpretation. But it's one that still stays within the themes of natural or naturalism, or things that are natural by nature. Something that seems to was also we're also moving from a derived answer as to what was the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, which was grain, based on the fact of it was a fruit that produced both oils and alcohols, which we could interpret as wisdom, and guilt, which we could interpret as knowing good and knowing evil. And then we moved on into the formation of human thought by examining the questions that are asked throughout the second chapter of Genesis, leading up into the banishment from the garden. And now that left us with some aspects, some unanswered or subjects, or just these three things here that are open for interpretation. Now, moving backwards, at the banishment of the garden, or from the garden, we come to the Neolithic Revolution. Now, I know from what I've studied, it happened around 10,000 BC, but I would say anywhere between 10,000 and 50,000, just to have an open field of when this actual revolution took off. And one of the key aspects of the Neolithic Revolution was the idea that man was clothing himself in skins with animal skins. And at the very end, or before the banishment, the last thing that God does for the man and the woman is He takes the clothes that they were wearing, which we must assume must have been, plant or made from plants, and He gives them animal skins to wear. So here we arrive at a coincidence of history and folklore, where we have two, comparable, I don't know how to say it, but subjects, or basically you have the Neolithic Revolution, man's wearing animal skins, and then here you have a story which is kind of an epic way of saying that, now man was wearing animal skin, attributing it to God. So prior to that, we have to wonder, or have to ask ourselves, we'll look at the three curses and what they may tell us. Now, the three curses that God puts on the man and the woman, or puts on the man, the woman, and the serpent, after the incident with the eating of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil, is He tells the man now he will have to toil the land, or labor for his bread, or for the grain, or for his food. He then tells the woman that her labor will increase when she gives childbirth, and then the serpent will have to slither on the ground, and he will bite at the woman's heel, and they will strike at his head, and there'll be a point of antagonism between the two. Now, for all of these three things, it kind of tells me that there may have been a shrinking landscape, like water at this point may have been very crucial to what was going on and to forming into these three curses, or interpreting or understanding these to be three curses. And the reason why I say water was, one, just for the sake of saying, personally, I wondered if in the beginning grain was actually in the middle of like water. And this whole idea of, in the last video we talked about legumes, how they were had gone and eaten legumes, and maybe they were around large water areas. Obviously this was, water would be very crucial to early man. But the reason why I thought water in terms of these three curses was because, one, if water was a shrinking supply, then man would have to work the land. He would have to find a way to labor and form, an agricultural system in order to develop and work with this fruit, this grain, to continually, eat from it, because it was still vital and a necessity for him to maintain the knowledge of good and evil, to still have this process of human thought. It was vital even to this day for us to, continually, maintain grain, part of our, dietary needs. Now, so there was that aspect of in the first curse that, with the lack of water, now man would have to find or invent ways for himself to labor the land for grain. Now, to support that, I would say that in the terms of woman, the fact that she would have to now labor, or childbirth would be a labor for her, could mean that before she gave childbirth in water. She gave childbirth in water, which was a way of facilitating or making childbirth a lot easier. It was something where, even today people say, well, I want to have a natural childbirth in water because it makes the childbirth, more bearable, or it's just easier, or, well, whatever. I think you get the idea of where I'm going with that. But now with lack of water, now childbirth was on land, and that would increase the pain, that would increase the labor, that would increase the whole thought of, or the whole pain of, or whatever, of the childbirth. You wouldn't have water to help, transition or make this birth easier on the woman. And then last, there was this idea of this serpent. Now, the serpent receives the curse because of the influence on the woman to eat the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. The serpent influences a woman to eat the grain. And the description that we're given of the serpent in the very beginning is one that he is very cunning or he's very crafty. Now, either term is almost diabolic just in nature. But the curse that the serpent receives at the end is that I guess his legs are removed, or he will now have to slither on the ground. So there's this kind of transition from an animal that walked to an animal that no longer walks, a snake just moving on the ground. And we're also told that the serpent was very cunning. So sticking with the three curses, there's this idea that maybe the serpents or the animals that man was seeing had moved from being serpent-like to being more snake-like. Maybe there were more exposure to snakes rather than the serpents. Just on the fact that this water was kind of depleting itself, So the three curses seem to be more, to me, water-based. It seems to be that they all could have been affected by a lack of water, kind of a fact that each one of them had to make a sacrifice because water had to be managed or manipulated. And so again we arrive into the Neolithic Revolution, where agriculture based on grain is going to establish the first families, and then from the first families into the communities, and then from the communities it'll eventually grow into society, or which would be represented by a city. Where you're going to get like the early cities of Iraq, and so on and so on. So, also inspecting the serpent, can we have an idea of what kind of animal this may have been, the serpent? And it says that the serpent was cunning. Now, I've thought many ways of what cunning can mean, and the final conclusion and the final interpretation that I can really seem to think is just the essential answer for it is that cunning is a way of, it's using your tongue as a weapon. A person who's cunning uses their tongue as a weapon. And can we think of serpents in terms of using tongues as a weapon? Do we know any serpent-like animals that would use their tongue as a weapon or a way of, getting their food? So we would have a serpent, which we think of kind of a lizard-like animal that uses their tongue as a weapon and had legs. So instantly you might think of like iguanas, things that were maybe more lizard-like animals that may have been around more dense, jungle-like areas, and now man was moving out to, where there was no more water, or the water was depleting itself, or being depleted. So now they were moving into areas where snakes were more prevalent than serpents. But also there's an idea of the serpent as why is this animal unique to the fact that it actually holds a conversation with the woman. And I know the largest interpretation right now is that the serpent is the devil, But I also would wonder, also why is this an original or a unique animal compared to any other animal? No other animal seems to have this, initial conversation with humankind. And the most natural answer that I can conclude to at this point would be that the serpent, and this is just based on the fact that we hold, our own species, our own selves, our own humanity, mankind, whatever, hold something that's unique to our family, and that is that we are carnivorous. We are animals that eat meat. We don't just rely on vegetables. So there was an initial kind of consideration that the serpent may have represented one of the first animals that we had eaten, or we began to eat. Maybe just a shrinking landscape, less water. Maybe there was a necessity to start moving into different food supplies. Maybe in the religious sense or the philosophical sense that the serpent, even in other stories, represents kind of a concept of immortality, because the serpent or the snake, we come to know, starts to shed its skin. So, early man may have found this skin and just came to the conclusion that the serpent just reinvents himself. So by consuming the animal, in ourselves, maybe we were trying to find the same way of making ourselves immortal. Thinking that if we ate, serpents or animals like that, that we could, or we could start to shed our skin, reinvent ourselves, become more immortal. And then just the aspect too of finding like a snake skin on out in the wilderness or whatever. This may be like the initial idea for ghosts. You find a kind of like the shell of an animal that you think is just reprocessing itself over and over again, and so there's this idea that the serpents kind of have a sense of immortality to them, and also because like just in other short stories that I've read, some of the serpent shows up or the snake shows up. They're always eating snakes. And this is always kind of like it was tied to like immortality, living forever. So that was my initial consideration, was for the serpent, was that because the water was depleting itself, they were starting to see more snakes. They were possibly eating snakes at this point. So now only were they eating grain, but they were eating they were eating other animals. And so that was the conclusion I came from the serpent and the three curses. Now, moving backwards, prior to that, another aspect of the story was the broken rib, when God makes woman from the broken rib of Adam, or he breaks a rib off of Adam and forms it with the dust or the clay of the earth, or the dust of the earth, and forms woman from this rib and heals it up again in Adam, or closes it up again in the man. And so I really had to kind of think about what would be a natural answer for the broken rib. Where could we find any kind of current answer, modern answer? that you could kind of put the broken rib against and kind of form like another coincidence, and that would be the only broken rib that I can think that mankind has, where there is a man has it and a woman doesn't have it, would be in our chromosomes, where the broken rib would be in our 23rd chromosome, where the fact that man has a Y chromosome, and it has this like one side that's just, it looks like it's been basically been broken off like a wishbone, you know. And for me, does this kind of represent a form of mutation, kind of a genetic way of transition? Because leading up into the second chapter, it looks like, you know, whether it's the beginning of the genus or the species, the idea is that man came first, the male of the species came first. I don't know if it was a hybrid or what, but it seems like the male of the species was the first creation. And then if there is some kind of transition genetically, based on our chromosomes or the male chromosomes, where man somehow contributes to the formation of the woman of the species who comes, or the woman of the genus who comes afterwards. So we have the possibility of the broken rib representing this 23rd chromosome, this broken chromosome. But going further along than that, there is this, in the story, this woman who eats the grain first. She eats the grain first, and so she becomes more knowledgeable, and then she in turn gives it to the man, which in natural terms could just be the sense of like woman was nursing man into wisdom. I mean, the only way I could think of producing both these two elements out of grain would be just you know, a woman eating grain and then nursing her child on it, where you may be able to extract both the oils and the alcohols, you know, when the child was nursing or feeding from the mother. So, and in that sense, in the interpretation, whereas, you know, woman, you know, offered the fruit to the man, that could be that woman was nursing the man, and by that way, we came to be intelligent. So, although we may have been the first creation of the actual, you know, species or genus or whatever, it was woman who came to wisdom first and had to nurse man into that type of enlightenment. And that would be, you know, transition of, you know, many years, and then eventually the enlightenment leads us into the banishment and into you know, having to support ourselves, and then just the growth of human civilization beyond that. So to answer all of or to wrap up the entire series, what we have is the formation of early man, and subsequently of early woman, who reside in a somewhat paradise, a garden, you know, where the cucurbites and the legumes and these all types of vegetables and plants that were edible, you know, that were available, and there may have been a transition, you know, from in terms of that, you know, water became very predominant. It became very, all over the place. You know, so man started to eat, you know, more beans, and along with you know, squashes and pumpkins, and that they became more water based by nature. But then, as the water began to, you know, deplete itself, and there was no, you know, large formations of water, evidently, you know, just for the sake of survival, they began to eat grain, which was now able to be found, because I would, you know, might assume that grains were, you know, in their earliest forms, probably with, you know, in the water, in marshes. May have been in the middle of lakes and then became in the middle of marshes, and eventually were starting to grow on dry land because the water was shrinking up. So that they began to eat grains, and based on the nature and just the nature, the pure nature of grains, and these two abstracts that grains seem to hold, both wisdom and freedom, or wisdom and guilt, in terms of oil and alcohol, grew our minds, grew comprehension of human thought. And eventually that led to the end of the story, where we eventually become banished from this paradise, from this where we now were land-based, and we would have to labor for everything after this. So that basically would conclude the entire series of thought that I had on the second chapter of the Genesis.